Section 33 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joyce Martin. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 33. Chapter 29. Caria. Upon the adjoining coast is Caria, then Ionia, and beyond it Aeolus. Caria surrounds Doris, which lies in the middle and runs down on both sides of it to the sea. In it is the promontory of Pedalium, the river Gallucus, into which the Temendium discharges itself, the towns of Dedala, Crya, peopled by fugitives, the river Axon, and the town Calinda. The river Indus, which rises in the mountains of the Sibarate, receives 65 rivers, which are constantly flowing, besides upwards of 100 mountain torrents. Here is the free town of Keunos, then the town of Parnos, the port of Crisa, from which the island of Rhodes is distant 20 miles. The place where Lorima formerly stood, the towns of Tiseusa, Poridion, and Larimna, the Gulf of Thyminus, the promontory of Aphrodisias, the town of Hydra, the Gulf of Shonus, and the district of Babusus. There was formerly the town of Acanthus here, another name of which was Dulopolis. We then come to Cnidos, a free town, situate on a promontory, Triopia, and after that the towns of Pegusa and Stadia. At this last town Doris begins, but, first, it may be as well to describe the districts that lie to the back of Caria and the several jurisdictions in the interior. The first of these is called Sybaritica, Sybaria being a town of Fergus. 25 states resort to it for legal purposes, together with the most famous city of Laodicea. This place at first bore the name of Diospolis, and after that of Roas, and is situate on the river Lycus, the Aesops, and the Capurus washing its sides. The other people belonging to the same jurisdiction, whom it may be not amiss to mention, are the Hydrolitae, the Themisiones, and the Hierapolitae. The second jurisdiction receives its title from Cynanas. To it resort the Lycaones, the Appiani, the Eucarpeni, the Dorylaei, the Medaei, the Julienses, and 15 other peoples of no note. The third jurisdiction has its seat at Apamea, formerly called Salani. After that, Sibotos. This place is situate at the foot of Mount Signia. The Marsyas, the Obrima, and the Orga rivers, which fall into the meander flowing past it. Here the Marsyas, rising from the earth, again makes its appearance, but soon after buries itself once more at Aulo Serenae, the spot where Marsyas had the musical contest with Apollo as to superiority of skill in playing on the flute. Aulo Serenae is the name given to a valley which lies 10 miles on the road toward Phrygia from Apamais. As belonging to this jurisdiction, it may be as well to mention the Metropolitae, the Dionysopolitae, the Euphorbenii, the Acmonenses, the Peltenai, the Silbiani, besides 9 other nations of no note. Upon the Gulf of Doris we have Leucopolis, Hamaxitos, Eulus, and Euthene. We then come to Pitium, Eutene, and Halicarnassus, towns of Caria. To the jurisdiction of this last place 6 towns were appended by Alexander the Great, the Angela, Sibdae, Medmassa, Eurylium, Pedusus, and Telmisus. Halicarnassus lies between 2 gulfs, those of Ceramus and Iasus. We then come to Mindos and the former site of Paleomindos, also Nariandos, Neapolis, Caranda, the free town of Termera, Bargyla, and the town of Iasus, from which the Iasan Gulf takes its name. Caria is especially distinguished for the fame of its places in the interior, for here are Mylasa, a free town, and that of Antiocha, on the site of the former towns of Cymenthos and Creneos. It is now surrounded by the rivers Meander and Orcinus. In this district also was formerly Meandropolis. We find also Eumenia, situate on the river Cludros, the river Gallicus, the town of Lycius and Orthosa, the district of Berycinthus, Nysa, and Trielus, also called Euanthia, Seleucia, and Antiochia. It is washed by the river Eudon, while the Thebaeus runs through it. Some authors say that a nation of Pygmies formerly dwelt here. Besides the preceding towns, there are Thydonos, Pyraha, Eurome, Heracula, Amazon, the free town of Alabanda, which has given name to that jurisdiction, the free town of Stratonicia, Hynidos, Ceremus, Terozine, and Pharontes. At a greater distance, but resorting to the same place of jurisdiction, are the Orthronienses, the Alindienses or Hippini, the Zistiani, the Hydicienses, the Apollonietae, the Trapezopolitae, and the Aphrodisienses, a free people. Besides the above, there are the towns of Cosinus and Harpasa, situate on the river Harpasus, which also passed the town of Tralisson when it was in existence. Chapter 30. Lydia. Lydia, bathed by the sinuous and ever-recurring windings of the river Meander, lies extended above Ionia. It is joined by Phrygia on the east and Mysia on the north, while on the south it runs up to Caria. It formerly had the name of Maeonia. Its place of the greatest celebrity is Sardis, which lies on the side of Mount Tmolus, formerly called Tmolus. From this mountain, which is covered with vineyards, flows the river Pactolus, also called the Chrysarous, and the sources of the Tarnus. This famous city, which is situate upon the Gygaean lake, used to be called Hyde by the people of Maeonia. This jurisdiction is now called that of Sardes, and besides the people of the places already mentioned, the following now resort to it: the Macedonian Calduani, the Laurani, the Philadelpheni, the Maeoni, situate on the river Cojamus at the foot of Mount Tomlus, the Tripolitani, who are also called the Antoniopolitae, situate on the banks of the Meander, the Apollonihiratae, the Mesotimolatae, and some others of no note. Chapter 31. Ionia. Ionia begins at the Gulf of Iosus, and has a long, winding coast with numerous bays. First comes the Gulf of Basilicum, then the promontory and town of Posidium, and the oracle once called the oracle of the Branchidae, but now of Didymian Apollo, a distance of 20 stadia from the seashore. 180 stadia thence is Miletus, the capital of Ionia, which formerly had the names of Lelegius, Pitiusa, and Anacotoria, the mother of more than 90 cities founded upon all seas. Nor must she be deprived of the honor of having Cadmus for her citizen, who was the first to write in prose. The river Meander, rising from a lake in the Mount Olocerne, waters many cities and receives numerous tributary streams. It is so serpentine in its course that it is often thought to turn back to the very spot from which it came. It first runs through the district of Apamea, then that of Eumenia, and then the plains of Bergyla, after which, with a placid stream, it passes through Caria, watering all that territory with a slime of a most fertilizing quality, and then at a distance of 10 stadia from Miletus, with a gentle current, enters the sea. We then come to Mount Latmus, the towns of Herculea, also called by the same name as the mountain, Caris. Myus, said to have been first built by Onians who came from Athens, Nolocum, and Pyrene. Upon that part of the coast which bears the name of Trogilia is the river Gesus. This district is held sacred by all the Ionians, and thence receives the name of Pannonia. Near to it was formerly the town of Phygella. built by fugitives, as its name implies, and that of Marthesium. Above these places is Magnesia, distinguished by the surname of the Meandrian, and sprung from the Magnesia in Thessaly. It is distant from Ephesus 15 miles, and 3 more from Tralles. It formerly had the name of Thessaloniki and Androlida, and lying on the seashore, it has withdrawn from the sea the islands known as the Deracidae, and joined them to the mainland. In the interior also is Thyatira, washed by the Lycus. For some time it was also called Pelopia and Euhippia. Upon the coast again is Mantium and Ephesus, which was founded by the Amazons, and formerly called by so many names: Alopus at the time of the Trojan War, after that Ortygia and Morges, and then Smyrna with the surname of Trachea, as also Samornian and Petalia. This city is built on Mount Pion, and is washed by the Cayster, a river which rises in the Cybelian range, and brings down the waters of many streams, as also of Lake Pegasus, which receives those discharged by the river Phorites. From these streams there accumulates a large quantity of slime, which vastly increases the soil, and has added to the mainland the island of Syrai, which now lies in the midst of its plains. In this city is the fountain of Calypia and the temple of Diana, which last is surrounded by 2 streams, each known by the name of Selenus, and following from opposite directions. After leaving Ephesus there is another Mantium, belonging to the Colophonians, and in the interior Colophon itself, past which the river Halesus flows. After this we come to the temple of the Clarion Apollo, and Lebadus, the city of Notium, once stood here. Next comes the promontory of Corycium, and then Mount Mimas, which projects 150 miles into the sea, and as it approaches the mainland sinks down into extensive plains. It was at this place that Alexander the Great gave orders for the plain to be cut through, a distance of 7 miles and a half, for the purpose of joining the 2 gulfs, and making an island of Erythari and Mimas. Near Erythari formerly stood the towns of Petelion, Helos, and Dorion. We now find the river Allian, Corineum, a promontory of Mount Mimas, Clazomenae, Parthenae, and Hippi, known by the name of Chytrophoria. When it formed a group of islands, these were united to the continent by the same Alexander by means of a causeway 2 stadia in length. In the interior the cities of Dophnus, Hermesia, and Cephalum, formerly called Tantalis, and the capital of Moenia, where Lake Sale now stands, are now no longer in existence. Archiopolis too, which succeeded Cephalum, has perished, and in her turns Clope and Lebadne, which succeeded it. On returning thence toward the coast, at a distance of 12 miles, we find Smyrna, originally founded by an Amazon of that name, and rebuilt by Alexander. It is refreshed by the river Meles, which rises not far off. Through this district run what may almost be called the most famous mountains of Asia, Mastusia in the rear of Smyrna, and Termetus joining the foot of Olympus. Termetus is joined by Draco, Draco running into Tmolus, Tmolus into Cadmus, and Cadmus into Taurus. Leaving Smyrna, the river Hermus forms a tract of plains and gives them its own name. It rises near Dorylaeum, a city of Phrygia, and in its course receives several rivers, among them the one called the Phrix, which divides Caria from the nation to which it gives name, also the Hylus and the Crios, themselves swollen by the rivers Phrygia, Mysia, and Lydia. At the mouth of the Hermus formerly stood the town of Temnos. We now see at the extremity of the gulf the rocks called Myrmexes, the town of Luce on a promontory which was once an island, and Phocea, the frontier town of Ionia. A great part also of Aeolia, of which we shall have presently to speak, has recourse to the jurisdiction of Smyrna, as well as the Macedones, surnamed Hyrcani, and the Magnetes from Syphilis, but to Ephesus, that other great luminary of Asia, resort the more distant peoples, known as the Sassarineses, the Metropolitae, and the Sibiani, both the lower and upper, the Mysomacedones, the Masturenses, the Briolitae, the Hypapeni, and the Dioschiritae. Chapter 32. Aeolus. Aeolus comes next, formerly known as Mysia, and Troas, which is adjacent to the Hellespont. Here, after passing Phocea, we come to the Aeaean port, then the spot where Larissa stood, and then Cyrene, Marina, also called Sebastopolis, and the interior Aegae, Atalia, Poseidia, Neontikos, and Temnos. Upon the shore we come to the river Titanus, and the city which from it derives its name. Gurnia also stood there on an island reclaimed from the sea and joined to the land. Now only its harbors are left. We then come to the town of Elea, the river Caicus, which flows from Mysia, the town of Pitane, and the river Ceneus. The following towns no longer exist: Cane, Lysimachia, Aturnia, Carine, Sistine, Sila, Sicilium, Theba, Astrae, Crisa, Palacepsus, Gergitha, and Neandros. We then come to the city of Perperne, which still survives, the district of Heraculates, the town of Coryphus, the rivers Grylios and Oleus, the region of Aphrodisias, which formerly had the name of Police Orgas, the district of Sepsus, and the river Evinus, on whose banks the towns of Larnissos and Miletos have fallen to decay. In this district also is Mount Ida, and on the coast Adramytteos, formerly called Pedasus, which gives its name to the gulf and the jurisdiction so called. The other rivers are the Astron, Cormelos, Syrenos, Alabastros, and Hieros, flowing from Mount Ida. In the interior is Mount Gargara, with a town of the same name. Again, on the coast we meet with Antandros, formerly called Adonis, and after that Semiris, and Asoas, also called Apollonia. The town of Palamadium also formerly stood here. The promontory of Lecton separates Aeolus from Troas. In Aeolus there was formerly the city of Palamedia, as also Chrysia, and a second Larissa. The temple of Semintheus is still standing. Colone, in the interior, has perished. To Adramyttium resort, upon matters of legal business, the Apolloniate, whose town is on the river Ryandicus, and Arese, the Miletopolite, the Pomanie, the Macedonian, Asculese, the Policine, and the Pionte, the Sicilian Mandascandi, and the Mysia, the Abratini, the people known as the Hellesponti, and others of less note. End of section 33. Recording by Joyce Martin. Section 34 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joyce Martin. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 34. Chapter 33. Troas and the Adjoining Nations. The first place in Troas is Hamaxitus, then Sebrenia, and then Troas itself, formerly called Antigonia, and now Alexandria, a Roman colony. We then come to the town of Ni, and Scamander, a navigable river, and the spot where in former times the town of Sigeum stood upon a promontory. We next come to the port of the Achaeans, into which the Xanthus flows after its union with the Simois, and forms the Palus Scamander, which was formerly a lake. The other rivers rendered famous by Homer, namely the Rhesus, the Heptaporus, the Carissus, and the Rhodius, have left no vestiges of their existence. The Granicus, taking a different route, flows into the Propontis. The small city of Scamandria, however, still exists, and at a distance 1.5 miles from its harbor. Ilium, a place exempt from tribute, the fountainhead of universal fame. Beyond the gulf are the shores of Rhoeteum, peopled by the towns of Rhoeteum, Dardanium, and Arisbe. There was also in former times a town of Achilleon, founded near the tomb of Achilles by the people of Mytilene, and afterwards rebuilt by the Athenians, close to the spot where his fleet had been stationed near Sigium. There was also the town of Aeantion, founded by the Rhodians upon the opposite point, near the tomb of Ajax, at a distance of 30 stadia from Sigium, near the spot where his fleet was stationed. Above Aeolus and part of Troas, in the interior, is the place called Teutherania, inhabited in ancient times by the Mysians. Here rises the river Caicus, already mentioned. Teuthrania was a powerful nation in itself, even when the whole of Aeolus was held by the Mysians. In it are the Paeoni, Andaria, Andria, Cael, Stubulum, Conisium, Teum, Balsea, Tiare, Teutherne, Sarneca, Halicerne, Lycede, Parthenium, Timbre, Oxipum, Lygdamum, Apollonia, and Pergamum, by far the most famous city in Asia, and through which the river Selinus runs, the Cetius, which rises in Mount Pendasus, flowing before it. Not far from it is Alea, which we have mentioned as situate on the seashore. The jurisdiction of this district is called that of Pergamus. To it resort the Thyatyreni, the Moisni, the Mygdones, the Brigemni, the Hyrocamente, the Purpurene, the Tiarene, the Hyrolophenenses, the Hermocapalate, the Atelenses, the Pantenses, the Apollonidienses, and some other states unknown to fame. The little town of Dardanum is distant from Rhoeteum 70 stadia. 18 miles thence is the promontory of Trapeza, from which spot the Hellespont first commences its course. Eratosthenes tells us that in Asia there have perished the nations of Solymi, the Laliges, the Babrises, the Colsanti, and the Tripsedri. Isidorus adds to these the Arimi, as also the Caprati, settled on the spot where Apamea stands, which was founded by King Seleucus, between Sicilia, Cataonia, and Armenia, and was at first called Demea, from the fact that it had conquered nations most remarkable for their fierceness. Chapter 34. The islands which lie in front of Asia. Of the islands which lie before Asia, the first is the one situate on the canopic mouth of the Nile, and which received its name, it is said, from Canopus, the pilot of Menelaus. A second, called Piraeus, is joined by a bridge to Alexandria, and was made a colony by the dictator Caesar. In former times it was 1 day's sail from the mainland of Egypt. At the present day it directs ships in their course by means of the fires which are lighted at night on the tower there, for in consequence of the insidious nature of the shoals, there are only 3 channels by which Alexandria can be approached, those of Steganus, Poseidon, and Taurus. In the Phoenician Sea, before Joppe, there is the island of Paria, the whole of it forming a town. Here, they say, Andromeda was exposed to the monster. The island also of Arados, already mentioned, between which and the continent, as we learn from Mucianus, at a depth of 50 cubits in the sea, fresh water is brought up from a spring at the very bottom by means of leather pipes. Chapter 35. Cyprus. The Pamphylian Sea contains some islands of little note. The Sicilian, besides 4 others of very considerable size, has Cyprus, which lies opposite to the shores of Sicilia and Syria, running east and west. In former times it was the seat of 9 kingdoms. Demosthenes states that the circumference of this island is 427 miles, Isidorus 375. Its length between the two promontories of Diane and Acameas, lying on the west, is according to Artemidorus 160.5 miles, according to Demosthenes 200. Philonides says that it was formerly called Acamantus, Zernicorus that it had the names of Cerastus, Aspelia, Amathusia, and Macaria, while Astronomus gives it the name of Croptos and Colonia. Its towns are 15 in number: Neapaphos, Palapaphos, Curias, Citium, Corinium, Salamis, Amanthus, Lepothos, Soloe, Tamosos, Epidarum, Chatiri, Arsino, Carpassium, and Golgi. The towns of Ceneria, Marium, and Edalium are no longer in existence. It is distant from Anamarium in Sicilia 50 miles, the sea which runs between the two shores being called the Channel of Sicilia. In the same locality is the island of Eleusia, and the 4 islands known as the Cleides, lying before the promontory which faces Syria. And again, at the end of the other cape is Styria, over against Neopopholos is Heracopia, and opposite to Salamis are the Salaminae. In the Lycian Sea are the islands of Ilyrus, Telendos, and Atalabusa, the 3 barren isles called Sipari and Dionysia, formerly called Caritha. Opposite to the promontory of Taurus are the Chelidonii, as many in number and extremely dangerous to mariners. Further on we find Lucola with its town, the Pactii, Lacia Nymphaeus, Lycia Nymphaeis, Macris, and Magista, the city on which last no longer exists. After these there are many that are not worthy of notice. Opposite, however, to Cape Chimera is Dolochiste, Corriagolion, Crambusa, Roge, Enagora, 8 miles in circumference, the 2 islands of Daedala, the 3 of Cria, Strongyle, and over against Sidmaya, the Isle of Antiochus. Toward the mouth of the river Galacus there are Lagusia, Macris, Didymi, Helbo, Scope, Asipus, Talandria, the town of which no longer exists, and in the vicinity of Conus, Rhodusa. Chapter 36. Rhodes. But the fairest of them all is the free island of Rhodes, 125, or, if we would rather believe Isidorus, 103 miles in circumference. It contains the inhabited cities of Lindos, Camirus, and Ialisus, now called Rhodos. It is distant from Alexandria in Egypt, according to Isidorus, 583 miles, but according to Eratosthenes, 469. Mucianus says that its distance from Cyprus is 166. This island was formerly called Ophiusa, Asteria, Ithria, Trioncre, Corymbia, Pioesa, Atabiria, from the name of one of its kings, and in later times Macaria and Oloessa. The islands of the Rhodians are Carpathias, which has given its name to the surrounding sea. Casas, formerly known as Acne, Nisyros, 12 miles distant from Sindos, and formerly called Porphyrus, and in the same vicinity midway between Rhodes and Cnidos Simne. This island is 37 miles and a half in circumference, and welcomes us with 8 fine harbors. Besides these islands, there are in the vicinity of Rhodes those of Cyclopus, Teganon, Cordelusa, the 4 islands called Diabetai, Hymos, Chalce with its city of that name, Sutlusa, Narthicusa, Diamastos, Progne, and off Sindos, Caesarusa, Therianarse, and Saledne, with the 3 towns of Notium, Nisoros, and Mendenteros. In Arconesus there is the town of Serimus. Off the coast of Caria there are the islands known as the Argi, 20 in number, also Haetusa, Lepsia, and Leros. The most noted island, however, in this gulf is that of Kos, 15 miles distant from Halicarnassus and 100 in circumference, according to the opinion of many writers. It was formerly called Meriope, according to Staphylos, Sea, Meropis, as Dionysius tells us, and after that Nymphia. In this island there is Mount Parion. Niceros, formerly called Porphyrus, is supposed to have been severed from the island of Kos. We next come to the island of Caranda, with a city of that name, and that of Podosus, not far from Halicarnassus. In the Gulf of Ceramicus we also find Peloponnesus, Hipponessos, Syra, Maya, Lampsa, Amnidus, Passala, Crusa, Pinacusa, Sepiusa, and Milano. At the short distance from the mainland is an island which bears the name of Synodopolis, from the circumstance that King Alexander left behind there certain persons of a most disgraceful character. Chapter 37. Samos. The coast of Ionia has the islands of Tragi, Corsai, and Acharos, which has been previously mentioned. Lade, formerly called Late, and among others of no note, the 2 Camelladae in the vicinity of Miletus, and the 3 Trogili near Mycale, consisting of Phalion, Argninon, and Sandalion. There is Samos also, a free island 87 miles in circumference, or, according to Isidorus, 100. Aristotle tells us that it was at first called Parthinia, after that Dreusa, and then Anthemusa. To these names Aristocratus has added Malamphilus and Carparissa. Other writers again call it Parithonarusa and Stephanie. The rivers of this island are the Imbrasus, the Chasius, and the Ibetes. There are also the fountains of Gigartho and Leucothea and Mount Saretius. In the vicinity of Samos are the islands of Ripara, Nymphea, and Aquileia. Chapter 38. Chios. At a distance of 94 miles from Samos is the free island of Chios, its equal in fame with the town of the same name. Ephorus says that the ancient name of this island was Athaliah. Metrodoros and Cleobulus tell us that it had the name of Chia from the nymph Chione. Others again say that it was so called from the word signifying snow. It was also called Macris and Pitiusa. It has a mountain called Pelineus, and the Chian marble is well known. It is 125 miles in circumference, according to the ancient writers. Isidorus, however, makes it 9 more. It is situate between Samos and Lesbos, and for the most part lies opposite to Erthere. The adjacent islands are Thalusa, by some writers called Daphunsa, Enusa, Elafiates, Arianasa, and Agriansua, with a town of that name. All these islands are in the vicinity of Ephesus, as also those called the islands of Pisistratus, Anthinae, Myonosus, Darusia. In both of these last there were cities now longer in existence. Parosilianae, with a city of that name, Circeii, Halone, Camone, Elisha, Lepria, and Respiria, Procusai, Bobuli, Phanae, Priapos, Psyche, Malene, Anare, Sedusa, Pele, Drymusa, and Hydros, Scopelios, Sukasa, Marathusa, Sile, Pisale, Periusa, and many others of no note. In the main sea lies the celebrated isle of Teos, with a city of that name, 71 miles and a half distant from Chios, and the same from Erythrae. In the vicinity of Smyrna are the Peristerides, Carteria, Alopeci, Eleusa, Bacina, Sistera, Promamianosus, and Megale. Facing Troas there are the Asinae and the 3 islands called Palatai. We find also the Lamii, the 2 islands called Palantii, Platae, Scophilus, Genton, Arithodon, Coli, Lagusai, and Didymi. Chapter 39. Lesbos. But Lesbos, distant from Chios 65 miles, is the most celebrated of them all. It was formerly called Hermurte, Lassia, Pelagia, Aegira, Ethiope, and Macaria, and is famous for its 9 cities. Of these, however, that of Pyra has been swallowed up by the sea, Arispe has perished by an earthquake, and Methymna is now united to Antissa. These lie in the vicinity of 9 cities of Asia along a coast of 37 miles. The towns of Agamede and Hira have also perished. Erissos, Pirha, and the free city of Mytilene still survive, the last of which was a powerful city for a space of 1500 years. The circumference of the whole island is, according to Isidorus, 168 miles, but the older writers say 195. Its mountains are Lepithymenus, or Dymnus, Makistus, Sirion, and Olympus. It is distant 7 miles and a half from the nearest point of the mainland. The islands in its vicinity are Sandelion and the 5 called Lusai. Sardonia, which is one of them, contains a warm spring. The Arginusae are 4 miles distant from Aegae, and after them come Phalusa and Pedna. Beyond the Hellespont and opposite the shore of Sigium lies Tenedos, also known by the names of Leucophyris, Phoenici, and Lyrenesos. It is distant from Lesbos 56 miles and 12½ from Sigum. End of section 34. Recording by Joyce Martin. Section 35 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. Martin. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 35. Chapter 40. The Hellespont and Mysia. The tide of the Hellespont now begins to run with greater violence, and the sea beats against the shore, undermining with its eddies the barriers that stand in its way, until it has succeeded in separating Asia from Europe. At this spot is the promontory which we have already mentioned as Trapeza, 10 miles distance from which is the city of Abydos, where the straits are only 7 stadia wide. Then the town of Procote, Lampascus, at first called Pitusa, the colony of Parium, which Homer calls by the name of Adrastia, the town of Priapos, the river Aesepus, Zelia, and then the Propontis, that being the name given to the tract of sea where it enlarges. We then come to the river Granicus, and the harbor of Arctes, where a town formerly stood. Beyond this is an island which Alexander joined to the continent, and upon which is Cyzicus, a city of the Milesians, which was formerly called Arctonisus, Deliones, and Dindymus. Above it are the heights of Mount Dindymus. We then come to the town of Placia, Aricae, and Scylace, in the rear of which places is Mount Olympus, known as the Mysian Olympus, and the city of Olympina. There are also the rivers Horesius and Rhinaticus, formerly called the Lycus. This last river rises in Lake Artenius, near Miltopolis, and receives the Macetos and many other streams, dividing in its course Asia from Bithynia. This country was at first called by the name of Chronis, after that Thessalis, and then Milianda and Strimones. The people of it are by Homer called Halozones, from the fact that it was a nation begirt by the sea. There was formerly a vast city here, Atusa by name. At present there are 12 cities in existence, among which is Gordiacome, otherwise Juliopolis, and on the coast Deskolos. We then come to the river Galbes, and in the interior the town of Helgas, or Germanicopolis, which has also the other name of Beskaite. Apamea, now more generally known as Merlia of the Colophonians. The river Athelius, also the ancient boundary of Troas, and the commencement of Mysia. Next to this comes the Gulf, into which the river Ascanus flows, the town of Barilion, and the rivers Hylas and Chios, with the town of the same name as the last mentioned river. It was founded by the Milesians at a place which was called Ascania of Phrygia, as an entrepot for the trade of the Phrygians who dwelt in the vicinity. We may therefore look upon this as not an eligible opportunity for making further mention of Phrygia. Chapter 41. Phrygia. Phrygia lies above Troas, and the people already mentioned as extending from the promontory of Lectum to the river Athelus. On its northern side it borders upon Galatia. On the south it joins Lycaonia, Pisidia, and Macedonia, and on the east it touches upon Cappadocia. The more celebrated towns there, besides those already mentioned, are Acteria, Andria, Selene, Colossae, Sarina, Cotaion, Sarine, Conium, and Midium. There are authors who say that the Mosi, the Bigri, and the Thyni crossed over from Europe, and that from them are descended the peoples called the Mysi, Phryges, and Bithyni. Chapter 42. Galatia and the adjoining nations. On this occasion also it seems that we ought to speak of Galatia, which lies above Phrygia, and includes the greater part of the territory taken from that province, as also its former capital, Gordium. The Gauls who have settled in these parts are called the Tolistobogi, the Volturi, and the Ambituti. Those who dwell in Maeonia and Paphlagonia are called the Trocimi. Cappadocia stretches along to the northeast of Galatia, its most fertile parts being possessed by the Tectosages and the Teutobodiaci. These are the nations by which those parts are occupied, and they are divided into peoples and tetrarchies, 195 in number. Its towns are, among the Tectosages, Anecra, among the Trachomi, Tavium, and among the Tolistobogi, Pessinus. Besides the above, the best known among the peoples of this region are the Actolenses, the Aracenses, the Comenses, the Didenses, the Hirorenses, and the Lustrini, the Neapolitani, the Edensus, the Seleucensus, the Celestoni, the Timonienses, and the Thebasini. Galatia also touches upon Carbalia and Pamphylia, and the Meli about Baris, also upon Salanticum and Oroandicum, a district of Pisidia, and Aubazine, a part of Lycaonia. Besides those already mentioned, its rivers are the Sangarius and the Galus, from which last the priests of the Mother of the Gods have taken their name. Chapter 23. Bithynia. And now as to the remaining places on this coast. On the road from Chios into the interior is Prussia, in Bithynia, founded by Hannibal at the foot of Olympus, at a distance of 25 miles from Nicaea, Lake Ascanius lying between them. We then come to Nicaea, formerly called Obia, and situate at the bottom of the Ascanian Gulf, as also a second place called Prussia at the foot of Mount Hypius. Pythopolis, Paranthropolis, and Corphantia are no longer in existence. Along the coast we find the rivers Iseus, Baraezon, Platanus, Arius, Asyros, Gedus, also called Chrysaorus, and the promontory upon which once stood the town of Megaris. The gulf that here runs inland received the name of Craspedites from the circumstance of that town lying, as it were, upon its skirt. Astacum also formerly stood here, from which the same gulf has received the name of the Astacinian. The town of Libisa formerly stood at the spot where we now see nothing but the tomb of Hannibal. At the bottom of the gulf lies Nicomedia, a famous city of Bithynia, Then comes the promontory of Leucatus, by which the Astacenian Gulf is bounded, and 37 miles distant from Nicomedia. And then the land again approaching the other side, the straits which extend as far as the Thracian Bosphorus. Upon these are situate Chalcedon, a free town 62 miles from Nicomedia, formerly called Procerastus, then Colpusa, and after that the city of the blind, from the circumstance that its founders did not know where to build their city, Byzantium being only 7 stadia distant, a site which is preferable in every respect. In the interior of Bithynia are the colony of Apamia, the Agrippenses, the Juliopolitae, the Bithynion, the rivers Sirum, Laphius, Pharnacius, Alcus, Serenis, Leueus, Scopius, and Hierus, which separates Bithynia from Galatia. Beyond Chalcedon formerly stood Chrysopolis, and then Nicopolis, of which the gulf upon which stands the port of Amycus still retains the name. Then the promontory of Nolocum and Istai, a temple of Neptune. We then come to the Bosphorus, which again separates Asia from Europe, the distance across being half a mile. It is distant 12 miles and a half from Chalcedon. The first entrance of this strait is 8 miles and 3/4 wide, at the place where the town of Spyropolis formerly stood. The Thyni occupy the whole of the coast, the Bithyni the interior. This is the termination of Asia, and of the 282 peoples that are to be found between the Gulf of Lycia and this spot. We have already mentioned the length of the Hellespont and Propontis to the Thracian Bosphorus as being 239 miles. From Calydon to Segum, Isidorus makes the distance 322 1/2. Chapter 44. The Islands of the Propontis. The islands of the Propontis are, before Cyzicus, Elaphonesus, from which comes the Cyzican marble. It is also known by the names of Norris and Procanesus. Next comes Ophiusa, Acanthus, Phoebe, Scopelos, Porphyrione, Halone, with a city of that name, Dalphatia, Polydora, and Artacion with its city. There is also, opposite to Nicomedia, Demonosis, and beyond Herculea, and opposite to Bithynia, the island of Thaneus, by the barbarians called Bithynia, and the island of Antiocha, and at the mouth of the Rhinidacus, Bespicos, 18 miles in circumference, the islands also of Alea, the 2 called Rhodusae, and those of Erebinthus, Megale, Chalcitis, and Pitiodes. Summary. Towns and nations spoken of, noted rivers, famous mountains, islands 118 in number, people or towns no longer in existence, remarkable events, narratives, and observations. Roman authors quoted: Agrippa, Sectonius Paulinus, M. Varro, Adacinus, Cornelius, Nepos, Hyginus, Helvetus, Mila, Domitius, Carbulo, Licinius, Macanus, Claudius Caesar, Arudius, Livrus the son, Sebosus, the register of the triumphs. Foreign authors quoted: King Juba, Hecatius, Hellenicus, Damastes, Diarchus, Betun, Timosthenes, Philonides, Xenogoras, Astinomus, Staphylaeus, Aristoteles, Aristocratus, Dionysus, Ephorus, Aristothenus, Hipparchus, Panetius, Serapion of Antioch, Callimachus, Agathocles, Polybius, Timaeus the mathematician, Herodotus, Marcellus, Alexander Polyhistor, Metrodorus, Posidonius, who wrote the Periplus and the Perigesis, Sultades, Periander, Aristarchus of Sicyon, Zeudorus, Antiogenes, Callicratus, Xenophon of Lampsacus, Diodorus of Syracuse, Hanno, Himilco, Nyphodorus, Caliphanes, Artemidorus, Megasthenes, Isidorus, Cleobulus, and Aristocreon. End of section 35. Recording by J. Martin. End of the Natural History, Volume 1 of Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley.